Hello, Kyla.
Hello, Alicia.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How has your day been?
It's been good. It's been quite quiet,
Yeah,
um, but that's good. Um,
quiet is good. Yeah, welcome quiet. Kyla, thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on Mind Yourself. I'm honored to have you on here.
I am honoured to be here. I'm hoping this is going to be a really fun conversation.
I think so because, like I said to you just now, the bit of your story that you did kindly share with me was so inspiring, and I'm just excited and intrigued to hear more about you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Would you be so kind as to introduce yourself, please?
Okay, so I'm Kyla. I live in Birmingham with my husband and my children, and for a long time, I worked in the publishing industry, typical corporate job. It was okay, but it wasn't great. And then just over 2 years ago now, I had a serious mental health crisis, which put me in a psychiatric hospital for a month. And since then, I've just been on a mission to reinvent myself, my life. I left my previous career and I'm now exploring a new career as a writer, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Wow. That is very intriguing, isn't it? It's even more intriguing now than it was at the beginning, Kyla.
Oh, thank you. Which part of it do you find intriguing?
All of it, all of it. I've got so many questions in my head, but before we jump into that, can we go back a bit and can I ask you what you were like as a child or what your childhood was like?
Wow, my childhood, I tend to think of as being in two halves. I spent the early part of my childhood in Birmingham, not too
Mhm.
far from where I live now. Well, just outside Birmingham, actually, in a lovely area. We used to be able to go out for walks at the weekend. I was in this lovely little village school where everybody knew each other, and it was at the time, obviously, I took it for granted. That was the
Mm.
only life I knew. But looking back on it now, that part was quite idyllic, really. And then when I was 8 years old, we moved house to a different part of the country. I had to start over at a new school, making new friends.
Mhm.
And I found that very difficult. A big part of it was the fact that my regional accent that I had was very different from the accent of the place I had moved to. And so when I got to my new school and I was
Mhm.
trying to make new friends, I got laughed at for the way I spoke. And that came out of the blue to me. It was a big shock. I'd never thought there was anything wrong with the way I spoke before.
Yeah.
And so I learned very quickly that the way to fit in and not get laughed at was to not speak. And I think that set the stage for the second half of my childhood, my teenage years. I was quite quiet, quite withdrawn. I didn't relate to people that easily. I was quite lonely a lot of the time. And I probably adopted a lot of beliefs and behaviors that were not that helpful. Around people pleasing was a big
Mhm.
one. Don't stand out. Don't, play small, hide in the background, don't draw attention to yourself. And
Mhm.
that's not me. And I think it set up that conflict that then went through most of my adult life of I didn't feel quite safe to be me.
Yeah. I can hear that and it sounds stifling already, Kyla. Like to have that happen at such a young age, to be mocked for the way you speak. And then to have to turn into, like you said, like a people pleaser and to have to attract into yourself.
Yeah,
And even then, you knew that wasn't you. That
yeah,
must, it
I
must
did.
have almost felt, it must have felt suffocating.
I think it did, but also I didn't know any different.
Mm,
And this was just the way that life was. And I don't
yeah.
think I ever questioned it. I mean, I'm trying to remember when I was first diagnosed with depression. I must have been about in my early 20s, I think.
Mhm.
And so I've been in a lot of counselling. I mean, I've been on and off antidepressants, I've been in counselling and so on. But I never really addressed that disconnect between how I was showing up in the world and
Mm.
how I felt on the inside.
Yeah. And you say you were diagnosed with depression in your early 20s. Before you were diagnosed, were you aware that you had depression?
I mean, again, I was aware that I wasn't finding much enjoyment in life,
Mhm.
but I didn't really think of it as depression.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know that life could be so much better.
Mm.
It was just, it was what it was. I think the joy had gone out of my life quite early on, and I just thought this was a natural part of growing up, and this is what being an adult is, that you're
Yeah.
just focused on getting by and, climbing the career ladder and
Mm.
married and having a family and all the things that you feel you're supposed to do as you grow up. And all that sort of joy and meaning and so on didn't seem to be part of the package.
Yeah. So you thought, this is life, this is being an adult, this is adulthood.
Yeah.
And so then when you were diagnosed with depression, did that change how you thought or felt?
Um, that's a really good question. It, I don't think it did really.
No.
Um, because my depression would kind of go up and down. And when it was at its worst, then yes, I acknowledged I needed a little bit of support, whether that was medication or therapy or whatever,
Mhm.
to get back to what I thought was normal, my sort of baseline.
Mhm.
And what I don't think I ever really appreciated was that baseline was still low level depression. So I would get help whenever I dipped really low. And then I would get back to this kind of, yeah, life's okay. And just assume that was me done for the time being until the next time I dip.
Yeah. And you say even the baseline was low line depression. And for anybody that doesn't understand or know what depression is or feels like, how would you describe it in your words, Kyla?
Well, that sort of low level depression, that sort of
Mm.
baseline that I thought was normal, it's just not really feeling any joy, but not really feeling that there's anything too badly wrong either. It's just, oh, life's okay. And you're
Mhm.
just kind of chugging along. You
We'll get
get
along,
through
yeah.
each day, and you don't really, I don't think it occurred to me to really try to make something of my life. I'd
Mhm.
have little goals, maybe I'd get a different job, or, we'd move to a nice house, but they're always the goals that people think you should do. They
Mm.
weren't like tapped into what do I really want. And they weren't goals that I went out and chased. They were,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I'll be happy when I get married. Oh, I'll be happy when we have children. And it just, I was expecting things to come to me because I didn't realize that I could actually take charge of my life.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? That's the defining pivotal moment in so many people's lives, including my own. The moment you realize, wait a minute, I can take control of this instead of letting it control me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Kylie, you said you varied between medication and therapy. Did either of them help?
The medication, I never saw it as, it did help, but it never cured anything,
Mhm.
in the sense that I learned that I needed to go on medication if I got so low that I didn't want to help myself.
Mhm.
And it would just lift me out of the place where I could then take a little bit of charge, go to therapy or whatever. I think medication can sometimes get you to the point where you're ready to really engage with therapy. But
Mm.
I don't think medication ever cured anything on its own. It was just a case of it lifts you to the point where you feel like doing something about it. And then the therapy, while I will be in therapy, I will get a huge benefit out of just having that regular time each week when someone would listen to me. And I would always feel better while I was in therapy because I had that space where I could talk, I could be vulnerable, I wasn't going to be judged. And then basically pretty much every time I would stop going, I would just relapse straight away, because it wasn't that it was fixing anything, it was just giving me that safe space that I think I really needed, of just a chance to be listened to.
Yeah, wow. And just keeping, like, we were talking about control. When you say you were trying both of them, the medication and the therapy, was that choice in your control, or were you doing what was suggested to you by the professionals?
I would just do whatever the doctor had on
Yeah,
offer.
yeah,
And usually it is medication, unfortunately. That's the
yeah,
system we're in, that the medication is by far the easier
it
option
is.
for the doctor to prescribe, and therapy quite often has either long waiting lists or a very fixed number of sessions. You tend to get 6 sessions, which
Mm,
is never enough for me, I don't
yeah.
think.
And I wonder what your opinion is on this, because I listened to a top psychotherapist in America, and he's been working in this field for, I think, like between 30 and 40 years. And he studies it as well, and he writes papers on it. He's just fascinating to listen to. And he was talking about the whole debate over medication versus therapy. And he said when he started his career, even back then, like in his early 20s, he had this feeling that medication was putting a plaster on it,
Yes.
whereas therapy was getting into the root cause and understanding it and like pulling it from the root. And he said over the 25 years of working with patients and other psychotherapists, the passion he's seen is that you can have the medication, and sometimes it'll work. He said up to 3, maximum 5 years. But after 5 years, your body and your mind become immune to it, and it
Right.
stops working. And he said what's really dangerous, what he's seen for people, for patients, is not only does it stop working, but it brings you back to square one. And he
Right.
said that's really damaging. That's what he's found. And I just thought of that there, and I just wondered what your opinion of that is, having tried both.
I certainly can see where he's coming from with the medication is the sticking plaster, and the therapy is what actually makes the difference. And I would completely agree with that. And I think, yeah, I knew what I was going to say, and it's just going now. I mean, I never stayed on the medication for as long as that. So I don't know about the long-term effects. What I found with medication, and I know it doesn't affect everyone this way, but what it did with me was it would take the edge off all the painful feelings I was having, but it would take the edge off all the positive feelings as well.
Yeah.
So I used to quit medication quite impulsively on a number of occasions because I was just fed up with not feeling anything.
Yeah.
I can remember one time having quit quite impulsively, which you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to taper off gradually. And so I remember having a conversation with my doctor about the fact that I had just quit. And she said to me, how are you doing? And I said, I'm feeling again. I said, the bad feelings, there's a lot of pain coming up, but I'm feeling again. And she was like, well, if they're negative feelings, don't you need to go back on the medication? And I was like, no, I'm feeling, and it's wonderful. Even though it was quite negative, I used to get to that point where I was just so desperate to feel something. And of
Yeah.
course, in therapy, it's almost the exact opposite. You're encouraged to feel so that you can process it. And I think that's where medication goes wrong. If you can't feel it, you can't process it. And so
Yeah.
it's going to lurk there. And when you stop the medication, it's all going to come back up again.
And isn't that fascinating, the way you've just described them, and you've got the experience, you've tried both of them, and you just described them as complete opposite. like one numbs the feelings and one encourages the feelings. That's so opposite, isn't it? And that's so like they're working against each other. And if you're doing both, like loads of people are, that must be so conflicting.
Yes. I mean, I do feel that it's very, very hard to do therapy effectively if you're also on medication. I have
Yeah.
tried that, and I do find, I mean, I certainly, after the major crisis that I had, when I finally found things that have worked in the long term, I did go through a phase where I needed to get off the medication so that I could do better with the therapy.
Yeah. So you could go back to the root cause, like you said.
Yeah.
And you've made the leap there. So you said you had depression in your early 20s, and then you mentioned the major crisis that happened. So in your words, how did it go from one to the other?
um, it took a long time. I mean, the crisis, I was 49 when I ended up in hospital. I thought I had found the solution about 4 or 5 years before that, in that I had discovered mindfulness, which again was through my doctor. I have been at the doctor's. I think I was probably either going on or coming off medication or something. And they had a leaflet about this free mindfulness course, which I think there was some funding locally just to run this a few times and see what happened with it. And I signed up. I did this 8-week course of mindfulness. It's called the MBCT course, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy. And it helped far more than medication or therapy had ever done. And by the end of the 8 weeks, I was doing the best I had ever done. I mean, not to the level I'm at now, but at the time, I was like, this is it. This is the cure. I have had a daily mindfulness practice ever since, and I was convinced. And the reason I thought it had made the difference was that I'd been given tools to manage my own mental health. I said earlier, with the therapy, it was about having that safe space. And as soon as I stopped and I didn't have the therapist anymore, I would relapse. But with the mindfulness, I had the tools. I could monitor my own mental health. And when I started to dip, I had the tools to do something about it. And I was convinced this was the answer and I was going to be fine. And I was fine for about 4 years. And then we hit 2020 and the pandemic. And the pandemic, it affected everybody differently. And for me, it was super intense. I was already in a work from home job. So obviously that carried on through lockdown and everything. But I had children at home, and my husband was also able to convert to work from home. And so we were a house full of people all the time. My youngest child was still at the point where he was not going to do his schoolwork unsupervised. So I was having to effectively home educate him and do my job and all my sort of self-care activity. I think I did keep going with the mindfulness, but everything else I would normally do, going out for walks in nature, I was big into swimming at the time, all of that just went. And the pressure was just huge. And I think it was just too much. And there's me thinking, oh, I've got my mindfulness, I will be fine, I've got the tools. And it was just too much. And I knew for months and months and months that I was struggling, but there was so much uncertainty, and I kept thinking, we're going to come out of this, everything is going to be fine. And it was just too much. And I did struggle on it. It was October 2021 when I had my breakdown. So it was right at the tail end of the pandemic. I almost made it through, but then I just snapped. There was it was literally as if something in my brain just broke. I've been under too much pressure for too long, with no time for myself, no time for any sort of self-care. And it was just too much.
And is that literally what it felt like to you, that something in your brain snapped like an elastic band? Is that literally what it felt like one day?
Yeah. And it was almost that sudden.
Yes.
I think it was a Monday. I'd done a normal day's work. I was in the middle of, I had open support tickets. I had people waiting to hear back from me, completely normal day's work, logged off in the evening. The next morning, I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I just couldn't log back in. And I phoned the GP instead of logging into work. And she signed me off for a month with stress. And I thought, okay, I've got a month to sort myself out. And instead of getting better once that work pressure was off, I just kept getting worse. And I just, even without the work, life was too much. That all the pressures on me, it just didn't feel like those pressures were going to go anywhere.
Yeah. So from the day you rang the GP and got signed off, did it get worse as the days went on?
Yeah. Over the course of a week. So it was quick. Over the course of a week, I got to the point, well, I mean, within 2, maybe 3 days, I was starting to seriously think about suicide. Now, I've been depressed on and off my whole life, but I had never, I got to the point where I thought, oh, if I'm in an accident, I don't really care. But I'd never actually thought of taking my own life, not seriously, but this time. And the thing that was quite terrifying, even at the time, was that it wasn't, I've always assumed that when people are suicidal, that they're just in this huge, unbearable emotional pain, and you will just do anything to make that pain stop, regardless of the consequences. It wasn't like that at all, not for me. Maybe it is for some people, but for me, it felt like an act of self-love, because it was me finally saying, enough. I'm going to put a boundary in place. I'm going to say, life is just asking more of me than I am willing to give. And I'm just going to say, enough. I'm done. And it felt so self-compassionate to be able to give myself that option. It's hard to describe it now, but at the time it was so peaceful and so, yeah, I'm done. I'm enough. I do not have to do this anymore. Except, of course, I do, because I have a husband and I have children, and but that was how low I got, and that was within a few days. And then I think something else kicked in after that, because I got to the point where I was so desperate to just end it all, and I couldn't. I had been at the point of having a definite plan. That's what people always ask you, that, when they know when someone's serious, if you have a plan, and I was there. But then my kind of ability to think went. I don't think I was ever actually diagnosed with any form of psychosis, but I have read about psychosis, and I do know that having very disordered thinking can be a symptom, and I think that might be what I experienced, because the best way I could describe it was I couldn't think in complete sentences anymore. It was just a jumble of feelings and images and emotions, and maybe a few words, but nothing coherent, which meant that I became incapable of taking my own life. I couldn't even get out of bed. I can remember lying in bed, tears streaming down my face, because I was just in so much pain. And I couldn't even work out how to get out of bed. I remember thinking, you swing your legs over the side and you stand up, and I couldn't do it, because I was so, my thinking patterns were so chaotic. And I think, I like to think now that was my mind's way of saving me, of making me incapable of taking any kind of action. I don't know. I mean, it's I don't even have clear memories of that phase, because it was so chaotic.
It's so beautiful that you can reflect on such a obviously difficult time and say, I like to think that was my mind's way of saving me.
Yeah.
It's so
But I think
beautiful that you
it
can
was
say that
because
now.
I had made the decision that I
You
was
had the
going.
plan. You had
I
the
had the
plan.
plan. I knew what I was going to do. I had made the decision. I honestly believe with all my heart that if I'd been capable, I would have gone through with it. I mean,
Yeah.
I wish I hadn't, because, you know, the thought of leaving my husband and my children behind
Yeah.
now, I can see would have just been so painful for them. And I'm really glad that I didn't put them through that. But at the time, I was going to.
But that was going to be my next question to you, Kyla. Like, as a mom, like, you know, you're a mom.
Yeah.
Most of your thoughts, everything is about your kids, isn't it? My kids,
Yeah.
how are they? How will they be? Everything is about them and protecting them. So then to have the thoughts of ending things, it must be so conflicting as a mother as well. It must be more
It
confliction.
was. Yes, it was. But I think it was because it wasn't that I didn't feel I was choosing to
Mm,
end my life. I felt I didn't have that choice. I felt I was not strong enough to go on living. I could not do what life was
yeah,
asking of me. And so, and I mean, yes, it was hard. And, you know, maybe my son also saved me, because I do remember lying on the sofa crying in this curled up little ball, and him just sitting next to me holding my hand. And I'll probably cry now, because he was quite young at the time.
yeah,
And I was so, I can remember even then, even through the state I was in, being worried, what effect is this having on him, that he is
yeah,
sitting here seeing me in that state. um but it wasn't a case of making a choice. It's like, I'm just not strong enough to do
mm,
this. And I believed that so completely at the time, that it
mm,
didn't feel like I was making a choice to
mm.
leave my family. It was just, that was the only thing I could do.
Yeah.
I was out of options.
That was the option. And then when you did think about, say, making your plan, did you think, did your mind then think about how people would be if you did go ahead with it?
Honestly, no, I don't
No,
think at that point I was capable of
think
thinking
that way. Yeah,
thinking that way at all. It was all on just, I haven't got the strength anymore.
yeah,
I just need to finish this, because I
yeah.
can't.
That's it. I
I haven't
can't.
got the energy. I was just out of energy, out of
Hmm.
everything.
Just
Um,
done, like you said. Just that's
yeah,
it.
yeah, just
Done.
done.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because suicide, unfortunately, is increasing.
Yeah,
People who are suicidal, unfortunately, that number is increasing. And I believe, Kyla, that it's not a coincidence that that's a direct result on how increasingly stressful and difficult life is. Like, we're in a cost of living crisis, there's a mental health crisis. Like, life is more stressful now than it's ever been, isn't it? There's no peace of mind. There's a device all the time. There's someone at you all the time. It's just constant.
yeah,
And yeah, I think one of my beliefs about suicide is that some people do just think, do you know what? I want to opt out of this game. I can't do this game.
yeah,
And then hearing you
yeah.
describe it, it sounds like exactly that. And the way you described it as an act of self-love, I think and I hope will bring a lot of new understanding to people when they think about suicide or being suicidal, because there's a lot of judgment about it, isn't there?
Yes,
A
I
lot of
think that's
judgment.
it. There's that perception that, you know, if you're suicidal, that you're not thinking straight.
Yeah,
But at the time, it felt like the clearest I'd been in a
yeah,
long time. It was
yeah,
like, this is me. This is just what I need to do.
yeah,
And yeah, you know, for someone to come in at that point and be judgmental about it. I mean, I'm lucky it didn't really turn out that way for me, but it does
yeah.
for a lot of people. And to say, oh, you're not thinking straight, you're just immediately invalidating everything that person is
Mm,
feeling in that moment.
absolutely. And I always think with suicide, those who judge don't understand, because those who understand don't judge.
Yeah,
Yeah. you know, and it's one of those things where we need to stop hating and education instead. And I think the way that you've kindly shared your story and described it, Kyla, thank you so much, because I think it will give people a lot more understanding about it.
Yeah. You know, I think there's
But
this perception that it's always just a desperate act to make the
yeah.
pain stop. That was how I'd always seen it before.
Mm.
And maybe for some people it is, but in my case it wasn't. And I'm sure for a
No.
lot of people it isn't.
Yeah, it just, yeah. And then you got to that stage where you're lying in bed and you have to talk yourself through, like you said, swinging your legs out. So where did it go from there?
That was where I think my husband saved my life, because he remembered that I had medical insurance through work, because I'd already been assessed by the NHS. They had turned me away, even though I had an active plan. You know, I think services were just so overwhelmed with where things were at the time. They said they couldn't offer me any support. And so then my husband remembered that I had this medical insurance. Now, I was in no fit state. I couldn't have told him where the paperwork was or anything. But somehow he sorted it all out. He made phone calls. He found this hospital in London that was willing to take me. And I really just, I've no idea how he did that.
Yeah.
I was in bed sobbing. He sorts everything out. He drove us down to London. It was half term. He put me and the kids in the car, and we drove down. We went to his cousin's house in London, because he was still sorting out the paperwork at that point, and being on the. That's the one thing I do remember about that
Yeah.
journey, was we're halfway down the motorway, and he gets this call from the hospital, and he puts it on the speakerphone, and the consultant needed to speak to me to assess how bad I was. And I'm in the back of the car. My little boy's holding my hand in the back of the car, and I had to tell the consultant that I wanted to die with all my children there. That was probably the low point. That was the hardest thing I think I've ever done. But yeah, we got down. So left the children at the cousin's house, and then my husband took me across London on the tube to get to the hospital. And I'm glad I don't remember that part of it, really. We were at the end of COVID. There was still masks on public transport, but I'm mask exempt, so of course I wasn't, and I'm still crying, still got tears streaming down my face the whole time. I'm not going to make eye contact with anybody if I can possibly avoid it. And I was just hanging on to my husband, and he was just leading me through tube stations and so on. And somehow we made it to the hospital, and I don't even really remember going in, because of course, because we were still under COVID restrictions, my husband couldn't enter the building. He had to say goodbye at the door and just send me into this hospital. And I don't really remember that evening too much, but you know, just having to walk in there. I've never set foot in a psychiatric hospital before. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going to happen to me or anything. But at that point I was out of options. You know, it was walk in there or go kill myself. So somehow I guess it was just wanting to, you know, if there was another option, I wanted to take it, because this was the thing about being suicidal, I never actually wanted to die. I didn't have the strength to go on living. And so if someone was going to put me in an environment where living became manageable, then yeah, okay, give this a go.
I think that is wow, that's a powerful sentence. I didn't want to die, but I didn't have the strength to go on living.
Yeah.
That again is going to help shed so much light and understanding around mental health, suicide thoughts, you know, everything. That's it there. I think you've just beautifully, that sentence says so much. I didn't want to die, but I didn't have the strength to live.
And that was exactly how I felt at the time.
Wow, that's so powerful, Kyla. And when you did go in there and you did get a sense of what it was about, or you spoke to people, hopefully kind, understanding people.
Oh, they were, yeah.
So yeah, so what was your initial feelings and thoughts, if you had any feelings or thoughts? What were
I
they?
mean, the first thing I remember clearly was waking up in there the following morning. I'd got there quite late in the evening, and it's all a bit of a blur, but I do remember I woke up the following morning. I'm in this strange place. I still don't know what's going to happen because I got there so late. I hadn't been properly assessed. They'd just given me a room and checked me in and stuff. And I remember waking up thinking, I have no idea how I am ever going to come back from this. Which actually, I was thinking about this earlier today, sort of in preparation for talking to you. And the fact that I thought, how am I ever going to come back from this, was actually a shift.
Yeah.
Because I could now see that maybe I wasn't about to die.
Yeah.
Because I think for the previous week, I'd literally thought that maybe I only had one more day. And now suddenly I'm thinking maybe there's something longer term. I wasn't so certain anymore that it was over. I had no idea how I was going to go on living, but there was just that little sense of possibility that maybe I might, but I didn't know how that was going to be possible.
Yeah, you can hear that, like a seed of hope, a tiny little seed of hope.
And it was tiny because
Tiny.
I still don't see how I can do this, but I was no longer accepting that it wasn't possible.
Yeah. And I think that's because you had professionals around you. Do you think that, like, in your subconscious, you thought, these are professionals, I can hand over a bit of the accountability and control to them?
Yes. I
Yeah.
think that was the magical thing about actually being in hospital. And I think it was a big part of the healing process, was that all responsibility has gone. Everything is taken away from you. Your meals are cooked for you. You're told when you're going to therapy. Your time is just managed for you. There were, I mean, this is the lovely thing about being in a private hospital. It's better funded than you might get otherwise. But you know, there were always staff on hand to talk to, even if it was like the middle of the night, you couldn't sleep. You could go find someone to talk to, and there was always someone there. And there was like literally no responsibility, and there also no judgment. That was fantastic. Everyone in place, the staff and the patients, everyone left their judgments at the door, and you just, it was such a safe environment. And that was what I needed at the time. No pressure, no nothing, just safety and people that were going to take care of me.
That's beautiful. And you know, being in Mental Health Awareness Month, I can only assume the people that put this in place, that that's one of their main objectives. We never should judge other people's mental health. It's like, we can't understand it. So who are we to judge it?
That was it. And you know, the hospital experience, it was all group therapy, but we were doing maybe 3 or 4 hours most days of group therapy, and everyone just shared so openly and so vulnerably. And I often think I healed as much from the compassion from my fellow patients. We'd all hit rock bottom in our own particular ways. We'd all messed up. We'd all done stuff we weren't proud of. Nobody judged any of it. It was just, I mean, maybe I was lucky with who was in there at the same time as me, but everyone just seemed so kind and so compassionate. And I think actually maybe it was because we'd all been through it.
Yeah, it sounds like raw human nature. And you know, you talking about it, your face lights up. You can just see it. You can see your face lighting up. And I think that's so beautiful. That's just so lovely that you look back at it like that, so fondly.
Yeah, there was just so much compassion just in the whole place. It was just safe, accepting, and it was exactly what I needed at the time. I think any kind of outpatient treatment at the point I was at would never have worked because I was still under all that pressure of just life. To go somewhere and have all of that taken away from me. And for the first, must have been a week or 2 weeks that I was there, the only person outside that I spoke to was my husband.
Mm.
And the phone reception in this place was terrible. So you didn't make many phone calls anyway. So I didn't even talk to him as much as I maybe would have done. But he was the only person outside that I
Yeah.
spoke to at all. And because of COVID restrictions, we didn't have visitors. So I wasn't, until I was well enough for my husband to take me out for the day, there was no point in visiting because he couldn't come in the building. So
Yeah.
you really were isolated from everything. And that
Yeah.
was what I needed at the time.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? And it started with that tiny little seed, like you said, on the first day, Kyla. And then did that grow progressively, or what happened from there?
It was a funny process. I mean, one of the things they did in the hospital, you got this timetable. My husband joked that it was like being back at school because they exposed you to all the different types of therapy. So I did CBT, I did DBT, I did anger management, I did all sorts of things that I can't remember the names of now, but you did a bit of everything. So you had that so you could get a feel for what worked for you.
Yes.
But also I came to realize over the course of the first couple of weeks, the other thing that had happened, the best way I can describe it was my sense of self had just gone.
Mhm.
I knew, in one sense, I didn't know who I was. I remembered everything that had happened. You know, I knew my name, I knew what had happened to me, etc. But it wasn't me anymore. I didn't feel like me. I didn't know what made me me.
Mm.
And I think with that going, what it took with it was all the things that I had struggled with my whole life, the people pleasing, the worrying about what other people think, the lack of confidence, the needing to always hide and play small, and everything like that. It all went, but it took my sense of self with it. So I was just like this empty shell is the best way I can describe it. And in one sense, that the old me has never come back. I've built a new me, which I think is the person I was meant to be all along. I remember there was one therapy session I was in. The therapist starts the session off. She gave us all a blank sheet of paper and some crayons. And she said, I want you to draw how you're feeling today. Well, that would have terrified the old me. I'm not good at art. And I didn't know how I was feeling in that moment either. So I you know, where do I start with this? So I just decided I would just draw the first thing that came into my head. And I drew a dragon's egg cracking open inside a volcano. Now, with my zero artistic skills, this took a bit of imagining to realize that's what I'd drawn.
Yeah.
But it was what I'd drawn, and I didn't see the significance of it at the time. It was just what had come into my mind. And it was one of the other patients in the session. She said, that's because you're becoming somebody new.
Wow.
And she said, she actually said she was really excited for me because she could see that there was this new person emerging here, and I hadn't seen it. I've still got the picture somewhere because it means a lot. It's a rubbish picture, but yeah, that's how it felt, that I had just, like, I'd been wiped clean, and I can now come back as the person I was meant to be.
Yeah, and like you said, built a new me that I was meant to be. That's how powerful and liberating is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty brutal way to do it, but you know, I tell people now that breakdown and that time in hospital is the worst and the best thing that has ever happened to me, because it was awful. It nearly killed me. I nearly left my husband and my kids. But the person that's come back, this is how I now know that all of those years that I had this low-level depression, because now I feel alive.
I can hear it.
Yeah, first time in ever, really.
Kyla, that's amazing. And you know, when you talked about rock bottom and nobody wants to go through these dark times, do they? But unfortunately, most of us do go through them. The thing that I've learned about people's rock bottom is very often that's where the best stories begin.
Yeah.
Very often.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It
I
is.
just hope that if somebody's listening to this and they are in their rock bottom, that they take that on board. Rock
Yeah.
bottom is where the best stories often begin.
That is so true. You're
Yeah.
so there, because I think you have to. I think you don't appreciate everything that life has to offer until
Mhm.
you've been right down there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's those times that teach us so much, isn't it? About ourselves and life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just so lucky that I was able to go through that rock bottom in such a supportive and safe environment.
Yeah. Definitely. Kyla, thank you so much. I can't believe the time. It's such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being so open and vulnerable about it, because I really, really hand on heart believe that you sharing that is going to help so many people. And
I
not
hope
only,
you're right.
I really do believe it will. And not only will it help the people that maybe are experiencing the same or similar to what you did, but I think it's going to give people more understanding as well about mental health, suicidal thoughts, depression, all of those things, and hopefully wipe away some of the judgment that unfortunately is out there about these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's been something that's been huge for me since all of this, is just yes, that acknowledgement that we need so much more understanding around mental health. It's so
Yeah.
much more complicated than most people realize. And so many people have so much potential that is just being blocked by poor
Mhm.
mental health. And it
Yeah,
doesn't need to be.
it doesn't need to be. There's always hope, isn't there? There's always hope.
There is always, and it is never too late. All of that happened to me when I was 49 years old. I'm now 50. Well, I'll be 52 later next month. And, I don't think it's too late. I'm
No.
convinced the best times of my life are still ahead of me. It is never too late.
Yeah, never too late. You're amazing. I know I've kept you for an hour now. I usually finish off asking the same three questions to all my guests. Do you have time, and would you like to do that, Kyla?
Yes, yeah, I have time. Let's go for it.
Good. I'm so grateful. Thank you. So if there is someone listening to this that's in the same or a similar position to the one that you were in, what would you like to say to them?
I would like to say that you have more potential than you can possibly imagine. There are always opportunities, possibilities, whatever situation you're in, it can get better, because there is always so much life to be lived.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for that. The next question is, what have you learned about life?
It is, I have learned that life is so full of joy and beauty and love, and it's always there. I just couldn't see it for a very long time, but it was there. It wasn't that it wasn't there, it was that I had all these limiting beliefs and um you know self-criticism and all this that was piled on top and was stopping me from seeing how wonderful life can be. And it wasn't about finding happiness or finding love, it was about letting go of all the things that were blocking me from receiving it. I didn't need to go looking for it. As soon as I let go of all the stuff that was blocking me, everything I could ever have wanted was just right there.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It is, it's so true, isn't it? If we obviously that's, what I believe as a mindset coach, but when you look for the bad, you see the bad. You look for the good, you see the good.
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I mean, my life is not, I've had a complete career change, but my life objectively is not that different to how it was before, but my mindset
The mindset.
couldn't possibly be more different. And I am happy and fulfilled in a way that I didn't think was possible before.
Beautiful.
And
I can
not
see
that
it.
much has changed
Not that much.
externally.
Yeah.
It's all a change on the
It's all
inside.
internal, isn't it? And that's what's fascinating about life. And to hear you saying those words, happiness, joy, fulfillment, and to see them and hear them is beautiful, especially when earlier on you said that you had no feelings.
Yeah.
We can hear you feeling those feelings now, and that's just
Oh, yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can sense it from here, all the way down here.
Oh.
And the final question, Kyla, please, is what do you think is the secret to life?
Just live it and embrace it. Just just get out of your own way. I think so many of us feel that the secret to life is you have to figure it out, and then we start overthinking and we start trying to force things, and actually it's so much simpler than that. You just get out of your own way, just embrace what is, and then you just find all the beauty in it.
That's beautiful. Life definitely is as simple or as complicated as we make it, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the simpler you make it, the
Yeah.
more fulfilling it will actually feel.
Absolutely. Let's keep it simple. Definitely. Kyla, your story has been so inspiring. And thank you. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on. And thank you so, so much for being so open, honest, and vulnerable.
Oh, thank you so much for, just you are actually recreating that safe space that I think just invites that honesty. So thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that anybody listening to this conversation enjoys it as much as I did making it.
Yeah, it's been lovely, and I hope people find it helps them.
Definitely. I have no doubt that that your story will help people, Kyla. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.